I left my jacket at the diner after breakfast with my son last Tuesday morning. A small thing. A jacket I'd owned for 3 years and could have replaced without losing sleep. But when I went back to get it, a 22-year-old waitress named Jade sat me down in the back storage room, closed the door, and said 7 words that rearranged every memory I had of the last 40 years of my life. She said, "I need you to hear something first. My name is Robert Calloway. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a firefighter in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I retired in 2019 with a clean pension, a paid-off house in the Noda neighborhood, and what I believed was a solid relationship with the only family I had left. My wife, Carol, died of a stroke 3 years ago. She was 58. There was no warning, no slow decline, just a Tuesday afternoon phone call from the hospital that split my life into before and after. After Carol, all I really had was my son. My son is 37. He works in commercial real estate, married his wife 6 years ago, and they have a daughter I love more than I can put into words. My granddaughter just turned 4. She calls me Pop Pop and laughs so hard at her own jokes that she falls off chairs. I had thought, until last Tuesday, that as long as she existed in the world, I had something irreplaceable. The morning it happened started the same way it always does. My son had been making a point of having breakfast with me every other week since Carol passed. I appreciated it more than I told him. We met at Rosie's Diner on Central Avenue, our usual spot, the kind of place where the coffee comes fast and nobody rushes you. We talked about his daughter's preschool, my recent physical, the gutters I needed to clean before winter. He seemed distracted, checking his phone a few times, but he's always had a restless energy, so I didn't think anything of it. He left first, said he had a showing at 9. I sat for another 10 minutes, finishing my coffee the way I always do, watching the morning regulars come and go, thinking about nothing in particular the way retired people are allowed to. Then I paid, tipped Jade, who had been our server that morning, and drove home. I got 30 minutes into a home repair project before I noticed my jacket was missing. It was a heavy canvas work jacket Carol had given me for Christmas 2 years before she died. I know it sounds sentimental over a piece of clothing, but I wasn't ready to lose it. So I got back in my truck and drove back to Rosie's. Jade was wiping down the counter when I walked in. She looked up and something shifted immediately in her expression. Not just recognition. Something more careful than that. She set down her rag slowly. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "She had to check my name from the credit card receipt. She told me later. Your jacket is right here." I set it aside. She reached under the counter and pulled it out, then held it without handing it to me. "Can I ask you to come sit down for a second? There's something I want to show you. It's going to be upsetting, and I'm sorry, but I don't think I can let you leave without telling you." I laughed a little. I thought she'd found something strange in the pocket. A forgotten bill, a medication I'd misplaced. "I know this is going to sound strange coming from someone you barely know," she said, "and I almost talked myself out of it 3 different times while you were gone. But my dad is 61, and I keep thinking about what I'd want someone to do if this were him." She brought me to a back storage room barely bigger than a closet, 2 folding chairs and a shelving unit of canned goods. She sat down across from me and pulled out her phone with hands that were visibly unsteady. "After your son left, he stood outside by his car for a few minutes. You can see the window from where I was clearing the table next to yours. I wasn't watching him on purpose, but he was on the phone and he was loud, and something about what I heard made me stop." She paused. I hit record before I even really thought about it. I didn't know if I should. I still don't know if I should have. But here, she pressed play. The audio was imperfect. Street noise, a passing truck, wind against the phone mic. But my son's voice was clear enough. He's always had a voice that carries. It's already in the vitamins, the same ones he takes every morning. I watched him take them before we even left for breakfast today. No, she got them from the same pharmacy contact. It's not traceable on a standard panel. The point is, we don't need to rush this. The symptoms are already showing up. He mentioned the memory thing again this morning to me, brought it up himself. So we just keep the pressure steady. Dr. Harmon is on board. Once we get 2 documented evaluations showing cognitive decline, we file for guardianship, not just power of attorney, full guardianship, and at that point the house and the retirement accounts are effectively ours to manage. The pension transfers automatically. Yes, I know it's a lot. Yes, I know it feels like a long time, but we are not going to be stupid about this. We are going to do it right. There was a pause on the recording. "Because he trusts me," my son said. "That's why. He trusts me completely. Jade stopped the playback. I was aware of the hum of the refrigeration unit on the other side of the wall, the sound of a fork dropping somewhere out in the dining room, my own breathing, which had gotten very deliberate in a way I recognized from years of walking into burning buildings. The technique you use when you need to keep your hands from shaking. "I'm so sorry," Jade said. "I'm really, truly sorry. I have sat inside structures that were fully involved, meaning fire on every surface, above and below, the ceiling dropping, the floor uncertain, and I have stayed functional by narrowing my attention to the next 3 seconds. What needs to happen in the next 3 seconds, not the next hour, not the rest of my life, just the next 3 seconds." I asked Jade to send me the recording. She had already emailed it to herself and uploaded it to her Google Drive. She said she'd made copies the moment she had a feeling I'd come back, which told me she'd been carrying this alone for 2 hours and had already decided she wasn't going to let it disappear. "The vitamins," I said. "I don't know anything more than what's on that recording. I'm sorry." I thanked her. I meant it more completely than I'd meant almost anything in recent memory. I picked up my jacket, walked back out through the dining room, sat in my truck in the parking lot, and allowed myself exactly 2 minutes to fall apart. Then I drove to a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods over from mine, a place where nobody knew me, and bought a set of supplement testing strips. Then I drove home and stood in my kitchen looking at the orange prescription bottle of multivitamins my son had started bringing me 4 months ago. He'd made a whole thing of it. Said he'd read an article about vitamin D deficiency in men over 60 and cardiovascular risk. Said he'd talked to his doctor friend and gotten a recommendation for a specific formula. He brought a new bottle every month like clockwork, always cheerful about it, always asking if I was taking them regularly. I had been. Every morning without fail. Because that's who I am. A person who follows through on things, who takes care of himself the way Carol always asked me to. I did not take any that morning. I put the bottle in a paper bag and drove to see the only person I trusted to handle this without immediately losing their head. My old partner from the firehouse, Marcus, had been with the department for 28 years before a knee injury forced him out. In retirement, he'd gotten his private investigator license mostly for something to do. He always said, but he was sharp and careful and he'd seen enough of what people did to each other that nothing much surprised him anymore. I'd been best man at his wedding. He'd carried Carol's casket. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and said, "Come in and sit down." I played him the recording. I watched him listen to my son's voice without expression, which was itself a kind of mercy. When it ended, he was quiet for a moment. "The vitamins," he said. "I have them in the bag." "All right. I know someone at a private lab. I'll drive them over personally this afternoon." He paused. "What are your symptoms been? You've mentioned the memory thing a couple times recently." I had. I'd made jokes about it, the way words sometimes slipped away mid-sentence, the occasional headache in the mornings. Twice in the past month, I'd walked into a room and stood there for a full minute, unable to recall why. I'd written it off as grief, as aging, as the natural consequence of spending 30 years in smoke-filled environments. My son had listened to each instance with concern, nodding, asking thoughtful follow-up questions. "How long do you think?" Marcus asked. He said 4 months on the call. "I started the vitamins about 4 months ago." Marcus looked at the bag on his coffee table with an expression I'd only seen on him at accident scenes. The lab results came back in 48 hours. Marcus called me on a Thursday morning and told me to come over and not to bring my phone. The compound was a synthetic anticholinergic agent, not something you'd find at a drugstore. At low, consistent doses, it impaired memory consolidation, disrupted sleep architecture, and produced the kind of gradual cognitive symptoms that present to general practitioners as early-stage dementia. At the concentration found in my vitamins, taken daily for 4 to 5 months, I would have begun showing measurable decline on standard cognitive assessments within another 6 to 8 weeks. Enough, combined with 2 evaluations from a cooperative physician named Dr. Harmon to support a guardianship petition. Marcus had also spent the 48 hours pulling on the thread about Dr. Harmon. He was a family practice physician in Mooresville, about 30 miles north of Charlotte. He had a history of malpractice complaints, a medical board reprimand from 2019, and a business relationship with a medical consulting firm that my daughter-in-law's brother ran. The brother had connections to a compounding pharmacy that operated in a regulatory gray area. So it wasn't just my son, my daughter-in-law, her brother, a doctor they owned. "What do you want to do, Rob?" Marcus asked. I'd spent the previous 2 nights lying in my bed thinking about my granddaughter falling off chairs from laughing too hard, about whether she knew anything. Of course, she didn't know anything. She was 4 years old, and she loved her mother and her father, and she called me Pop Pop. Whatever happened next, she was going to be caught in it. I thought about my son at 11 years old, after I'd pulled a double shift and come home to find him alone in the kitchen at midnight because the babysitter had left early and Carol was traveling for work, and he hadn't called anyone because he hadn't wanted to be a problem. He'd made himself a bowl of cereal and sat there doing homework, and when I walked in, he looked up and said, "Dad, you look tired. Do you want me to make you some toast?" He was 11 years old, and he was worried about me. I thought about who he was then and who he was on that recording, and I tried to map a path between those two people that I could understand. I couldn't. I still can't. I'm not sure I ever will. I need to know the money, I said. I need to understand the actual financial situation. Marcus had already started on that too. My son's real estate business had been struggling since 2022. His partner had exited the LLC under contested circumstances, and there was pending litigation. They were behind on their mortgage by 4 months. My daughter-in-law had a private student loan in default, and a personal loan she'd taken out in her mother's name without her mother knowing. The total picture, Marcus told me, was somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 in combined debt, with no clear path to resolution, given their current income. I had a house worth $480,000, a pension of $6,200 a month, retirement accounts totaling roughly $900,000. In their calculation, they were drowning, and the answer was floating 40 minutes away in no-da. They had asked me for help. 6 months ago, my son had sat at my kitchen table and told me things were tight and asked if there was any way I could lend him $50,000 to help stabilize the business. I'd given him $35,000. I told him I was worried about depleting my reserves. He nodded and said he understood and thanked me. I had thought that was the end of it. What I hadn't known was that $35,000 barely touched what they owed, and that the conversation that followed between my son and my daughter-in-law apparently involved the conclusion that legitimate requests were going to be too slow and too limited to solve the problem. I asked Marcus to set up cameras in my house. Just the kitchen and the living room. He did it in 2 hours. Equipment he described as standard PI work. Undetectable, unless you knew exactly where to look. Then, I did something that took everything I had. I called my son and asked him to come for dinner. He said, of course, he'd love that. He'd been meaning to come by. His voice was warm and easy, the voice of a man who believed everything was proceeding according to plan. He arrived at 6 with a bottle of wine and a container of pasta his wife had made. He was relaxed. That was the thing I had to keep returning to in the days that followed. He was relaxed. He set the pasta on the counter and asked about my knee, which had been bothering me, and refilled my water glass without being asked. And we sat at the kitchen table, where we'd sat together 1,000 times. I watched him watching me, looking for the signs, waiting for me to stumble over a word or lose a thought mid-sentence, the little evidences that would tell him the compound was doing what it was supposed to do. I had not taken any vitamins in 5 days. My thinking was clearer than it had been in months, but I gave him what he was looking for. I paused too long before saying a neighbor's name. I lost track of what I was saying twice. I watched the satisfaction. He worked hard not to show. After dinner, I told him I wasn't feeling well. Not to worry, just tired. He said rest was important. He said he'd mentioned to Dr. Harmon, in passing, that his father had been experiencing some memory concerns, and that Dr. Harmon had said he'd be happy to do a general wellness evaluation anytime, no pressure, just to have a baseline. He said it casually, almost as an afterthought. That was when I knew for certain that the recording was real and not a nightmare I had constructed from grief and loneliness. That was the moment it became completely true. He hugged me at the door. He said he loved me. I said I loved him back. After his headlights disappeared down the street, I stood in my front hallway for a long time. Marcus had everything on camera. He called at 8 the next morning. I spent another week making sure I had everything I needed. Marcus documented the lab results, the camera footage, the recording, the paper trail on Dr. Harmon, and the pharmacy connection. He hired a forensic accountant friend to create a summary document of my son's financial situation. My attorney, a woman named Beverly who had been Carol's college roommate and was not a person who frightened easily, reviewed all of it. "Robert," she said, after reading through everything, "you understand what this is. This is criminal conspiracy to commit fraud at minimum. Depending on how a prosecutor looks at the drugging, It could go substantially higher. I know. Tell me what you want to do. I asked her how long it would take to change my will completely, remove both my son and my daughter-in-law as beneficiaries, restructure the estate so that my granddaughter's share was held in a trust she couldn't access until she was 25 and administered by an independent trustee. She said she could have documents ready within a week. I told her to start immediately. Then I told her the rest of it. I called my son and my daughter-in-law and asked them both to come to Beverly's office. I told them it was about estate planning, that I wanted to go over some updates to my will while I was still sharp enough to make good decisions. My son said that sounded like a great idea. He said he was glad I was being proactive. They sat across the conference table from me and Beverly. I watched my daughter-in-law's face when she saw Beverly's expression and understood this was not a routine meeting. She's quicker than my son in certain ways. She knew within the first minute that something had gone wrong. I put a folder on the table between us. I told them I knew about the vitamins. I told them I knew about Dr. Harmon. I told them I had a laboratory analysis, camera footage, and a recording that made the entire plan clear in my son's own words. I watched the color leave his face in a way I will not describe because even now it is not something I want to put into language. My daughter-in-law said nothing. She sat very still. My son said, "Dad," I said, "I want you to listen to me, and I want you to understand that I am not going to lose my composure in this room, but I need you to hear exactly what I'm saying." I told him that I had spent 31 years running into places that were trying to kill me because I believed that people deserved to be saved, that I had held Carol's hand while she died and I had kept going, that I had given him everything I had since the day he was born, and that I had believed, until 11 days ago, that the relationship we had was one of the true things I could count on. He started to speak, and I told him to wait. I told him I was not calling the police that day. I told him this was not mercy. I told him I was not calling the police because my granddaughter was 4 years old and did not deserve to grow up visiting her father in prison, and that was the only reason, the singular reason, and he should not interpret it as anything else. The folders Beverly slid across the table contained the legal agreements. My son would have no further access to me or my property, my daughter-in-law the same. They would both sign affidavits, drafted by Beverly, confessing in full to what they had planned and what they had done. Those affidavits would be held by Beverly in a sealed file with all supporting evidence. If anything happened to me, regardless of circumstances, those documents went to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's office the same day. If they attempted to contest my will or initiate any guardianship proceedings, the documents were released immediately. My son's hands were flat on the table. He was looking at them. "I have one question," I said. "I want one answer, and I want it honest. Does your daughter know anything about this?" He looked up. Whatever I expected to see in his face, I don't know. What I saw was something closer to shame than anything else I recognized. "No," he said. "She has no idea. She thinks we've just been going through a hard time." All right. My daughter-in-law signed first. Her hand was steady, which told me something about her I didn't want to know. My son's hand shook. Beverly told them they could leave. My son stopped at the door. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "Good," I said. "That saves us both some time." I have not spoken to either of them since. I have, twice, video called my granddaughter on her birthday, and at Christmas, arranged through Beverly and a neutral third party. She is still herself. She still falls off chairs laughing. I will not let what her parents did take her away from me, and I am still working on what that looks like over the long term. The headaches I'd been having for 4 months cleared up within 2 weeks of stopping the vitamins. The word slippage, the foggy mornings, the standing in rooms unable to remember why I'd entered them. Gone. My mind came back like a room when someone turns on the lights, gradual, and then suddenly complete. My doctor, my real doctor who I'd been going to for 14 years, ran a full panel after I explained the situation in general terms. He said the good news was that 4 to 5 months at that exposure level, caught when it was, should not produce lasting damage. He said I was fortunate. The will now leaves the house, the retirement accounts, and the pension death benefit to a combination of the Charlotte Fire Department Benevolent Fund, the Stroke Research Foundation that Carol's cardiologist had recommended, and a scholarship endowment at my old high school for kids who want to go into emergency services. My granddaughter's trust is there for her at 25. The rest does not go to the people who decided I was worth more as a legal ward than as a living father. I went back to Rosie's diner the following week. Jade was working the morning shift. I sat in her section and ate breakfast, and when she brought the check, I gave her back the folder she'd handed me with the recording. Inside were documents Beverly had prepared at my request. A personal letter and a certified check for $15,000, which was what I could do immediately without disrupting accounts. Beverly is also looking at a scholarship fund in her name through a local culinary school, because Jade mentioned once that she's been working her way toward opening her own place. She looked at the check for a long moment without speaking. Then she looked at me. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "You saved my life," I said. "I did have to do this." She pressed her lips together and nodded. She folded the check carefully and put it in her apron pocket like she was afraid it might disappear. I think about Maya sometimes. The barista in the story I heard once about a father who left his glasses behind. I think about all the strangers who see something wrong happening and look away because it isn't their business, because getting involved is complicated, because the cost of caring about someone you don't know always seems to exceed the reason to act. And then I think about Jade standing at a window watching a man on a phone outside a diner and deciding that what she was hearing was not something she could unknow. She could have told herself it was a misunderstanding, that she'd misheard, that families are complicated, and it wasn't her place. She could have handed me my jacket, said have a good day, and gone back to clearing tables. I would have driven home and taken my vitamins that afternoon like I always did, and the mornings would have gotten harder, and the words would have kept slipping, and eventually my son would have sat across from a cooperative physician and described a father who was losing his grip, and the physician would have nodded and reached for his forms. I am alive and clear-headed, and drinking my coffee without fear, because a 22-year-old woman I'd tipped $8 decided that a stranger's life was worth the risk of being wrong. There are things I still sit with that I don't know how to resolve. I raised my son. I was there for every part of his life. The sick nights, and the school failures, and the broken hearts, and the big ordinary days that make up most of a life. I do not know at what point the person I raised became capable of this, or whether I missed something I should have seen, or whether the financial pressure warped him into someone else, or whether this version of him was always there waiting for the stakes to get high enough. I have no clean answer. I suspect I never will. What I know is that the money was never worth more than my life, and that the worst part of all of it is not the violation, not the compound in the vitamins, not the cooperative doctor, or the forged paper trail. The worst part is the 31 years of real love that now have this running underneath them like a fault line. I have to hold both things at once. The father-son breakfasts that were real, and the father-son breakfasts that were surveillance. I am learning to do that. Some days are better than others. Carol used to say that the people who scare you most are not strangers, but the ones you've already let all the way in. She was usually talking about grief when she said it, but she was right about it in more ways than she knew. I still go to Rosie's every Thursday morning. I sit in Jade's section. I drink my coffee and watch the regulars come and go. Sometimes she stops at my table for a minute between orders and we talk about her plans, the savings she's building, the name she's already picked for the restaurant she's going to open. She has this energy that Carol had, the kind that makes you feel like the room is more solid when they're in it. I am 63 years old. My wife is gone, and my son is a stranger, and my granddaughter is growing up in a house I cannot enter. But I am here. I am present and clear-eyed, and I wake up every morning in a house I own outright, and I make my own coffee, and I take vitamins I chose myself, and outside it's whatever season it is, and the day is available to me in a way I no longer take for granted. I will live another 15 or 20 years, if my body and luck hold. I intend to do something with that time, worth the trouble it took to keep it. If you're listening to this and something in it sounds familiar, I want to say one thing directly. Not about the money, not about the betrayal. Just this. The small decisions are the ones that change everything. Jade deciding to hit record, me deciding to go back for a jacket, my son deciding, at some point in a bad year, that a shortcut was available to him. Every one of those decisions made a different world. Pay attention to the small ones. They matter more than you think. And if you ever find yourself in a position like Jade's, watching something unfold through a window, and wondering whether to get involved, wondering whether it's your place, whether it'll be worth the trouble, let me be the one to tell you. It is. It is always worth it. The person on the other side of that decision is somebody's father, somebody's everything, and they will spend the rest of their life grateful you didn't look away. Where in the world are you hearing this story? Have you ever had someone step up for you when they had no reason to? Have you ever been that person for someone else? Tell me in the comments. And if this story reached you in some way, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the only thing that beats a world where people are capable of what my son did is a world where people are also capable of what Jade did. And I believe, most days, that world is still the one we're living in.